from Learning for Sustainability Scotland. Betsy's going to provide us with an overview of Learning for Sustainability to help set the scene for today. So over to you, Betsy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. And let me just share my PowerPoint here. I hope you can see that. Is that showing? Thank you so much for inviting me to this session this afternoon. I'm delighted to be speaking about an archaeological approach to learning for sustainability. If you haven't come across Learning for Sustainability Scotland, we're actually a Scotland-wide network. It's a membership network. Anyone with an interest in learning for sustainability can join, so please join us if you haven't already. Our members come from schools, colleges, university, communities, really cross-sectoral, because sustainability is an issue that has an impact on us all. We're part of a global network too of centres, and sustainability, as you all know, is a global issue, a global challenge. We, since 2015, globally have bought into a set of really very inspiring global goals called the Sustainable Development Goals. And essentially, these are goals which are trying to ensure that as a planet, we're heading towards a sustainable future. So this graphic you might not have seen before, the 5 Ps, really shows that all these issues are issues that you must look at in the round. It's about people, but also about our planet's natural resources. And these two really are linked so closely to our prosperity. It's something that we all need to buy into in partnership. And also, of course, at the moment, there can be no greater thing than peace being one of these 5 Ps. So learning for a sustainable future, or learning for a sustainable world. Essentially, I'm going to speak about this in terms of past, present, and future, where we've come from, where we are at the minute, and where we might go from here, and the role of learning. And I guess thinking about where we come from, I'm a geographer, geologist, I tend to think of things in very long spans of time. And you might have come across this word, the Anthropocene. At the minute, we are seen to be in an era where the hand of people is evident right across the planet, for good or otherwise. Issues like a changing climate, reduction in biodiversity, poverty, migration. These are issues that are people induced. So when we look to the future, I think any child born today stands a good chance, because of health improvements, of living to the next century. But we really don't know what's coming. What will they see in their lifetime? And so how should we help them prepare for this? Reflecting on the past and looking to the future are two sides then of the same coin. And I think the recent climate change conference, COP26, really showed this, looking at where we've come from, where we are now, and then a real need to look to the future. This is the Tree of Promises that was erected in the middle of the COP meeting. But in Scotland, sustainability isn't something that is new to us. We are part of what I guess we could call carrying stream of responses to sustainability. We've got a reputation that goes back a long way for innovative thinking, some of which I think you could say maybe caused the current issues of today, but a lot of practice too, which is to do with innovative solutions. And many would say, I would certainly say, that sustainability and social justice are really, looking back to our past, such an important aspect of who we are as a people in Scotland. If you look at our national poet, who was a humanitarian, a philosopher, a great belief in social justice, and then John Muir, who you will have come across, who didn't stay in Scotland but was born in Dunbar and inspired national parks in the States. And then a real hero, Patrick Geddes. I live in Perth. He was born in Perth. He was an amazing biologist, but also town planner, sociologist. He framed Think Global, Act Local, but also just his view of place, work, folk, all linking in one whole. And then another hero of mine who I was privileged to know, and he, Professor John Smythe, co-wrote the chapter on education for the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. So we've got this carrying stream if we look back. And then let's start to look forward. Learning for sustainability is something that is special to Scotland, and it's contextualized. It's about who we are and what we want to be. And this quote I particularly like. It comes from the report of the One Planet Schools Working Group, which was actually the group that started to frame the policy for learning for sustainability in Scotland. And if you read through it, I would highlight where it says learners are educated through the landscape and understand their environment, culture and heritage, and develop a sense of place and belonging to the local, national and global community with a connection to the natural world. So that kind of vision is behind what learning for sustainability is about. It's contextualized. It's place-based. It's rooted in where we are, rooted in real life, and it connects. So it connects to the past, it informs the present, and it helps us to link into and prepare for a future that, yeah, as the SDGs indicate, is maybe uncertain. It's going to be complicated, but it starts from where we are. Now, many of you in a school's base will have seen this, the Learning for Sustainability word cloud. You'll recognize that in the word cloud is identity and heritage, but also the other aspects that we're going to be speaking about in this webinar that Rebecca mentioned: teaching and learning approaches such as outdoor learning, cooperation, collaboration, also themes and values such as equality, fairness, and skills such as critical thinking and problem solving. So this is such a good starting point for learning for sustainability, amongst a range of many other starting points. And learning for sustainability, as you will know, it's an entitlement for learners. It's currently being strengthened in Scottish education. In 2021, the professional standards, the GTCS standards, were strengthened. Learning for sustainability is one of the 3 underpinning themes. Something else to mention that is coming up is that the Learning for Sustainability Action Plan is currently being strengthened by Scottish Government, and there's an opportunity for co-creation here with young people and linking in to the current and future education bodies. And resources for learning for sustainability are also constantly being added to and strengthened. If you haven't done so already, please sign up and become a member of Learning for Sustainability Scotland. We have a bulletin that goes out each month. It's free to join, and it'll flag up all sorts of new resources. We've also got some resources and professional reading on our website too. But of course, if you look at the Education Scotland site too, there's a summary page, there's a glow group. There are tons of resources out there that can help on your journey. And some of those link to natural and cultural heritage. And something else that you might not have come across is the new Learning for Sustainability Hub, which is on the GTCS website. We've been helping them to create it, and it's an emerging thing with some self-directed professional learning that you might be interested to take a look at too. And we're constantly have professional learning activities. As I say, sign up to the newsletter and find out more. Another important thing to flag up is, if looking to the future, that this really sits right at the centre of the new national upcoming conversation about the future of education. And so, yes, there couldn't be anything more important than linking the local heritage and what you are up to in schools, linking it to Learning for Sustainability and helping learners to develop alternative futures based on engagement with history, culture, and identity. Learning for Sustainability really does begin here in Scotland. Okay, I'll finish it there, but please, if there are any queries, I would be happy. I'm certainly going to be listening to all the really fascinating inputs that we've got coming up now, but get in touch, and that's our website, but please feel free to email and tweet as well. I'm looking forward to connecting with you in the rest of this webinar.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I do encourage everyone to sign up to the bulletin. It's something I look forward to in my inbox every month. I'm going to just remind everyone that the questions for Betsy or for other speakers, they'll all be addressed at the end. So if you could post them into the chat bar or to ask them in person at the end. We're now going to move on to our second speaker, who is Dr. Liz Curtis from the University of Aberdeen. Liz will introduce us to the Out of My Window project and how it's used to explore very local heritage with young people. So I'll hand over to you now, Liz.
Hi, I'm just going to see if I can get my slides to show. So this will be an interesting experiment again. Okay, can you just let me know if you can see?
Yeah, we can see that.
That's good. I'm just going to see if I can see. Yeah, I can now see the other ones. So hello, my name is Liz Curtis and I work in the School of Education at the University of Aberdeen, and I've been there a very long time. But before I came to work there, I used to work for what is now Aberdeen Urban Studies Trust. So my job was to take children and their teachers around the local streets to actually where I now live in Aberdeen, and we would look for evidence of life around 100 years ago. So at that point, that was loosely speaking called Victorians. Or we would go around the same streets and look for evidence of living during the Second World War. So a lot of the work that I've been doing with students over a long period of time has been to encourage them to learn for themselves how to make use of whatever their local environment is to look for evidence of life in the past. And I think that's a really important part of thinking about the different ways in which we can look at evidence within social studies more broadly, but specifically within the outcomes for, I've just about forgotten what it's called now. It's people, events, societies of the past. I've mangled that. But anyway, so the social studies, the historical element of that. And I think what's also really interesting is what Betsy was saying in terms of linking and thinking about learning for sustainability. One of the key things about this particular activity was that it used to be pre-COVID, it was called going for a walk. And students were encouraged, and again, this is based on using street trails for learning, to go for a short walk wherever they happen to be living, and to look for a range of evidence from the built environments across the 3 areas of social studies. But during COVID, we had to rethink that, partly because, well, entirely because none of our students were now either in Aberdeen or on campus. And for a lot of the early part of lockdown, we weren't really allowed out. So we started looking at alternative ways of thinking about how you might capture an element of evidence for living in the past. So this is where Out My Window came into being. This is a photograph taken out of my window from where I'm sitting now. And it's a photograph of my own back garden looking into the backs of the houses in the street that runs parallel to mine. So the idea here is that this is the kind of activity that can be done anywhere through looking out the window. I've done similar exercises to this where we've actually looked out of the window of the McRobert building, which is right on the edge of campus, and it overlooks a very mixed area of houses from different periods of time. And we've used a combination of old maps and current maps to think about the changes that have taken place. So in the course of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start by looking out my window, and then we'll just take a slightly broader view in a slightly different part of Aberdeen. So this is to say how our third year students would have met this activity. So all they were asked to do was to take a photograph out of their window, and they were asked to think across social studies. But if we were looking specifically at the experiences and outcomes from the historical elements, this is a kind of flavour of what you might be looking at. So the view from your window is likely to include features from the past. Now, I'm fortunate because the features of the past that I look at are very obviously different to modern things. So we're going back in time around 100 years in terms of my own house, probably slightly longer than that. But you might look out your window and be looking at features from the 1970s or the 1980s or even the 1990s. And if you're at primary school in 2020, that's a long time ago. And I think that was an interesting thing that Betsy explored previously when she was talking about this idea of reflecting on the past and examining the future, and this idea that what will a child see in their lifetime, and beginning to develop the understanding by looking for clues in the built environment about what did things look like in the lifetime of others. So if I'm looking at the photographs out of my window, so say the first one on the left hand side shows the view straight out of overlooking my garden. And then the view on the right-hand side is looking out the right-hand side of the window where I am. So if we were to take a very almost didactic approach and just name things that we see, I've highlighted there's a vent in the roof of one of the small outhouses. There are poles in my back garden, which are for putting the washing lines on. There are the chimneys of the houses, and as I say, there's the outbuildings themselves. But we can also turn that round a bit and start by, instead of naming the things, ask questions. So in order to think about how children start making sense of what they see, is to give them the opportunity to tell you what they see, or to ask about why things are there, and to think about how that relates to everyday lives in the past. And if I was thinking about this from a sustainability point of view, I might be asking questions about keeping warm. Why are there 5 chimneys in the rooftops that I can see in the street next to mine? So they're making links to the fact that in the past, instead of having central heating that you might have now, or electric fires, or I'm trying to think, you might have a wood burning stove, people kept warm by having open fires. They had a very different way, still using fossil fuels. So you've got not only the history of the buildings, but you're starting to build up the history of the use of fossil fuels, which is obviously a very important part of understanding issues of climate change today. In terms of things like, it says, what is this feature? And there's a vent in, if you look in the left-hand side of the photograph on the left, in the shed roof, there's a little triangular vent. In that shed, there used to be a copper boiler, which is where you would put your laundry in and boil it all up and clean it and then hang it out on the washing poles to dry. But next to that was a toilet and bath. So once you'd done your laundry, you could then reuse the water to have a hot bath, or at least a warm bath. So it's a really interesting way about thinking about how people in the past, as well as in the present, were reusing or thinking about not wasting the hot water that had been generated. So, as I say, one of the things I think is really important in terms of sustainability, that this is sustainable from the perspective that it's on your doorstep and it's immediate, and gives you opportunities, as Hilary Cooper has identified a long time ago, in terms of the key ideas of thinking about the past, that you're considering change over time, which I think again reflects what Betsy was talking about, that it's about what you know now, what you know about things in the past, and how that can make you think differently about possibilities for the future. It's about developing the skill of interpretation and deduction. So some of the things you can look at out your window or in your street, and you'll know immediately what they are. And then you'll be able to use other things to help you interpret what you see. So, yeah, it has changed. Sorry. In this photograph here, you start getting the, I suppose it's the next stage of thinking about what it is, or what might help you as a teacher support the wider sense of historical interpretation. So where does the rest of evidence come from to help you build that picture and sense of chronology? So the photograph, the black and white photograph on the right-hand side in this picture, is the remains of what used to be a sort of small hamlet of houses, because there used to, basically Rosemount is built entirely on top of farms. So this is the buildings at the front where the trees are, is what's left of a small hamlet called Stonyton. And if you look directly behind there, you'll see a small faint terrace of houses beginning to be built, which were the new houses being put in at the same time as my house was built further up the road. And what's interesting there for me is looking at that and realising that they used, their architecture reflects the kind of rural houses that used to be there before. But it also, again, opens up questions about city expansion, which again links past to present. So Aberdeen in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s went through a period of rapid expansion, which we're also seeing now. So we're seeing lots of developments on the edge of our city too. So it kind of helps think about, why is it that people want to move out to the edges of cities and not want to live in the middle of them? And then I was thinking about, there's questions of keeping warm, keeping clean, but also getting about. And this is taken from the Scran archives, which I know many of you will be familiar with. And if you're not, one of the beauties of Scran is that it is available free to use. Most local authorities have paid for their use, but free to use by schools. And you can use any of the images for educational purposes without having to pay a fee for doing so, which is really good. Anyway, so what I'm going to finish off with is a slight contrast to this and a slightly different way into thinking about learning from your immediate built environment. I'm fortunate that from the point of view of living in Aberdeen, as part of my family comes from Aberdeen for many generations. And I've seen this used in school settings, particularly in rural schools, where there are members of staff who, like some of the pupils, also have come from the place for a long time. But using census is another way of making sense of what you see in the streets. So the two families that I have circled, one in green and one in blue, is the family of William Tuch and the family of James T. Tuch. And James T. Tuch was my grandfather, and he lived in the same street, and more than that, in the same building as one of his uncles, William Tuch, and his family. And if we look at the next slide, this is a view of the same area in which my grandfather and his family grew up from the middle of the 19th century right through to the early 20th century. But also learning things about when you see street names, as you would have done in the census. So this one says 12 Barron Street. If you go and look today on Google Maps, you won't find Barron Street, but you will find Great Northern Road, which during the 19th century, as Woodside expanded, used to be 3 different street names. So it was Wellington Street, Haddon Street, and Barron Street. So again, in thinking in terms of the Principles and Practice document, we're looking at developing understanding of time through the sequencing of evidence and locating events in time, and understanding how not everything is static, so that things that you see today both looked and perhaps were called different things in years gone by. So this is another example of just looking at the street as it is today on the right-hand side and comparing that with a similar view. It's probably slightly further up the road. It's sometimes quite hard to match pictures entirely the same, but it means that when you go back to look at the census, you begin to build up a visual picture of the kinds of buildings in which those families stayed in. And I'm just going to finish off with coming back to the census. So the census is an important thing if you can find it. And I'm very fortunate in Aberdeen, our local studies library has copies of actually all the census for the city. And you can make A3 photocopies of individual sheets of the census. So it's quite easy to turn into a PDF, which you can then use with pupils in the class. So obviously on the information you get there, you get information about where the census was taken, who lived in each apartment or house, the occupation. So William Tuch here is a wool spinner. One of his daughter was a carpet weaver. Another was a wool worker. And then my grandfather, at the point where he was newly married, he was only 22 and he had a very tiny baby, and he was a baker's journeyman. So he'd not long finished an apprenticeship to become a baker. So thinking about that is really important. And then this last column, I think, is really important because it tells you how many rooms with windows are in each different, in this sense, flat within the tenement building. So both of these families lived in 3 rooms, which was quite, for the area and the time, was quite a large apartment for the size of the family. And this makes really good links between built environment and perhaps developing drama as a way into thinking about life in the past. So what you can then do is to think about, if you put the name of one of the people from your census and thinking about what was their home like, can you imagine what it might have been to be in that home? How many rooms, how many people, who were the other members of the family, what were the kinds of things they were getting up and doing, and what did their days look like? So for me, it's a really, I'm just going to come back to this slide here and finish off. One of the really nice activities that we've done with children and with students in relation to sort of creative responses, as well as a means to thinking about how you interpret the past, is imagining streets, both from a combination of how a street feels in the present. So if we were looking at the right-hand side, that would be Great Northern Road today, or looking at it 100 years ago, and thinking about it, imagining it as perhaps a time of day, a piece of music, something to eat, and then you end up with contrasting short poems that give a kind of more metaphorical feel about that sort of experiential link to what it might look like. So I'm going to finish there and come back out.
Thanks so much, Liz. I've got a bit of feedback there. It's nice to hear how much we can do without even leaving our home, how much there is to study out of our windows. I was a bit upset when you said that the 80s and 90s was a long time ago, but I'm sure I'll get over that. So we're going to move on now to our next speaker, who's Dr. Kate Sharp, who's a postdoctoral research associate at Durham University. Kate's going to introduce us to the project Co-Producing Tolerant Futures Through Ancient Identities and the new resources that are being developed as part of that. So over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hello, everybody. Apologies for the short delay, and thank you very much, Jane, for inviting me to talk today. It's lovely to be able to share with you this project that I'm currently working on at Durham University in partnership with originally Stirling University, but then our leader moved to Edinburgh University. So that little logo at the bottom of the slide is a little bit out of date now. We're about maybe just over halfway through a 6-month project at the moment, but our funders are the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and they have this great system whereby they'll fund a 3-year project, and then following that they will allow you another 6 months of funding to respond to some of the issues that you found in the original project. So what we're doing now is the second part of that, the 6 months follow-on project. So what I'm going to do today is explain a little bit about the original project and some of the findings, and then tell you what we're doing to respond to those findings in the current project. And I have to say that back in 2016, when we first started the original project, we had no real idea how important primary education was going to be to this project. But I'll get on to that a little bit later. Okay, so just to take you back to that original project a few years back now, pre-COVID, and what we were trying to do was to explore how Roman and Iron Age heritage is understood and used by people in the present. So particularly in relation to identities, and we did it in two parts. My colleague Chiara at Edinburgh University is an expert in digital analysis, and what she did was do an enormous analysis of social media, looking at tweets, looking at Facebook messages, and searching for key terms like Roman or Iron Age. And while she was doing that, I had the lovely job of travelling around the country, visiting museums and outdoor heritage venues, doing surveys and talking to people. So the outcome of that really was, or one of the outcomes I should say, was that we found that the Roman and Iron Age past often are presented with quite stereotypical and sometimes outdated terms, for example, and they're quite often very divisive. For example, civilized Romans and the barbaric Iron Age people. And you only really have to think back to Monty Python's sketch and what did the Romans do for us to understand what I'm getting at. So just to illustrate this a little bit more, these are some of the quotes that Chiara collected from Facebook and Twitter. And I'm sorry to bring up the subject of Brexit again, but at the time we did the project, that was it was happening. So we were quite interested in how people were talking about Brexit using the past. And you can see how in these quotes, people are talking about barbarians living in huts. They're talking about hordes of coarse barbarians and equating those to people moving from the east into the UK now. They're talking about the Roman Empire, equating that with what was going on with Brexit. So you can see that people are really using the past to talk about the present in very divisive ways. And I have to say they were using the same arguments on both sides of the Brexit debate, which was quite interesting. So at the same time, I was going out and talking to people. I was observing displays and activities at museums and heritage venues. And here you can see I spent a wonderful couple of weeks at the Scottish Crannog Centre, talking to people, talking to visitors and staff, interviewing people. And later on in the project, when we realised how important education was, I also did a lot of interviews with teachers and educators at museums and heritage sites. And I mentioned the focus on children. Well, it very quickly became apparent how important this was. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to you. Under 15s are a really important section of visitors to heritage sites. And also we discovered that the messages that we hear about the past when we're very young can be hugely powerful. And there's a quote there from Hilary Mantel, which I rather like, saying that when I was a child, the past felt close, it felt personal. And also, if you challenge that, you're taking away their childhoods almost. And we also, having researched a little bit about tolerance, realised that education about tolerance really needs to start quite soon. So this led us to look a little bit about the history of teaching history in primary schools, because we realised that every generation seems to have very different experiences, perhaps because curricula changed. There's also, we discovered significant variations between England, Scotland and Wales, not just because of the curriculum, but because of the national priorities, different identities, different local narratives. And of course, the introduction of prehistory to the curriculum in England was a major change, and that resulted in a huge demand for help from teachers talking to heritage educators, looking for advice and guidance. And of course, I'm sure you're aware of all the other influences that there are on children, some good, some not so good. Yeah, a huge range out there. Many of them really really repeating those stereotypes and exaggerations that we don't think are very helpful. Again, at some of the sites that I visited, they offer all sorts of activities for children, quite often school groups visiting, and there was a very clear divide between those sites talking about the Romans, where they were asking children to take part in drills as soldiers, and those sites that were focusing on the Iron Age, where the emphasis was much more on crafting things, farming, making wattle and daub walls, and baking, those sort of domestic activities. And there didn't seem to be much acknowledgement of the fact that the Roman period and the Iron Age period was very different in different parts of Britain, and over a long period of 400 years. And even within the Iron Age itself, we found very different, confusing stereotypes. In the museums and outdoors venues, there tended to be a focus on the domestic. So, and the terminology around that was all to do with sustainability, skills, trading, farming, very passive things. Whereas if you look at popular media, film, TV, and gaming, of course, a very different presentation of the Iron Age with crazy naked warriors, very, very different. And of course, the truth is somewhere in between of all of that. So our overall findings were these very binary uses of the past that tend to create hostility between others based on ethnicity, culture, and race. And we also discovered, as I mentioned, that education was frequently mentioned as a reference point. People very often said to me, but it's what I learnt in school. What we decided was there was a need for us to do something to try and remedy this, to help both heritage curators and teachers to create experiences that are more create a more tolerant attitude, and really challenge some of these stereotypes. So our response is a new project, the 6-month project that I mentioned. We're creating a thing called a chatbot, a new digital resource, and we're doing that in partnership with a lot of heritage venues and museums, who have been wonderful in giving us feedback through workshops and really helping us to identify some of the issues and some of the solutions as well. And we have some storytelling expertise, and of course we needed a digital designer, so we have those on board. But we also are hoping that some of you may join us in evaluating what we produce. So that will be the next stage of the project in the next few months. So we'll be looking for help with an online survey from teachers, educational specialists, heritage professionals as well, to see whether what we've actually produced is going to be useful to you. So you're probably asking, or maybe you're not asking, what is a chatbot? Well, it's an interactive conversation with a digital character. So imagine your WhatsApp or your Facebook messaging, but you're talking to somebody in the past. So as a user, you're offered options to take the chat in different directions. So it could be a different experience each time you do this. And we know that this has been used in museums with good results for the short sessions, 5 to 20 minutes, and it really engages people. So we thought that might be a nice way for teachers either to just get inspiration themselves, or to use it within the classroom and guide it with the children. And the other nice part of this is that it can be adapted, so you can take it and create your own stories and characters to suit what you want to teach, or to fit with local stories, local people, and we will be including guidelines on how to do that for yourself. So the chatbot will have to do a lot of things, really. It's quite a tall order. It needs to relate right across Scotland, England and Wales for the Iron Age and Roman periods, and of course the curricula is different in each place, and it needs to be engaging and inspiring for both primary teachers and educators, but also for children themselves. We're keen to make sure that it's based on the latest archaeological and historical evidence. So that's another challenge, to ensure that we're up to date. And it needs to reveal those commonalities and variations that will counter those exaggerated stereotypes, and make people rethink what they know about the Romans and the Iron Age. And it needs to present otherness in positive ways, and allow reflection on how you personally interact in the present. And of course, it needs to explore how ideas of the past shape how we think about the present and the future. So I'd like to introduce you to our little cast of characters. We now have 7 characters, children who live at different times between 500 BC, so way before the Romans arrived, and 500 AD when they'd gone. So it covers that period of the Roman occupation of Britain. And they're each based in a different place, scattered across Britain, as you can see there, and they each have their own little stories. So behind this is the concept that the children have found a way that they can chat, talk to each other and send pictures to each other using special wax writing tablets. So it's effectively a messaging app, but it works across both time and space, and it allows us in the 21st century to talk to them as well. And we need a name for the messaging app, so if anybody has a bright idea, do get in touch. I rather like Backchat, but apparently that's being used for another app, a anti-bullying app, which is great. So we can't use that. So any ideas, let me know. So again, by sharing their experiences and talking to each other in these conversations, the children can learn about how different they are, but also realise that they're more alike than they thought. And we get that variation, so they can discuss many issues relating to all sorts of difference and otherness. So it allows the teacher to explore those from a different perspective. And they also break down some of those stereotypes, the old Romans versus the barbarians ideas. As I said, we're about just over halfway through. So far, we've created our characters. We've written most of the chat, and I'm at the moment working on supporting material. So I'm working on an ethical glossary to help teachers talk about the past using ethical terminology, because we think that that's going to help an awful lot. We obviously need to transfer it onto the digital platform, and then we're going to be doing the evaluation, which I mentioned. So I'll show you my email address at the end of this, but I'm sure if you get in touch with Jane, she'll be able to forward any messages to me. So I'll finish by showing that email address, and really invite you to please get in touch if you've got any ideas or suggestions, if you'd like to take part in the online evaluation, or if you think that the chatbot might be of interest to you once we've launched it and you'd like to have a go with it. Please do get in touch. Okay, I'll finish there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. I think there's going to be quite a lot of people very excited about having a go with the chatbot. I know I can't wait to message with them. I'm gonna hand over now to our very own Jane Miller. Jane's the Learning Officer at Archaeology Scotland, and our presentation is about exploring historic graveyards with a focus on Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh and new resources being developed for this site. So I'll hand over to Jane now.
Thanks, Becca. So yes, as Becca says, I'm Jane, I'm Learning Officer at Archaeology Scotland, and I'm just going to really quickly talk to you about how we've used historic graveyards in the past as a focus for local heritage projects, and then I'm going to introduce a new resource that we are working on. So I'll start off, I'll very briefly talk about, let me just, I presume you can see my screen okay. Anyway, so yeah, so we use graveyards a lot. They're a fantastic resource for any local heritage project. And from a learning for sustainability perspective, graveyards offer opportunities for outdoor learning. They give an insight into inequalities in the past. And through the stories of individual graves, we can also explore lots of different themes like colonialism and the Atlantic slave trade. We can find evidence of that in the gravestones by researching the gravestones. And these are themes that are touched on in the new Greyfriars Kirkyard learning resource. So over the past couple of years, I've been very lucky to be able to work with Susan Buckham and Claire Forrest from Edinburgh World Heritage and teacher Katie Hunter, who I think is here today, on the Making Lasting Impressions Greyfriars Kirkyard Community Learning and Interpretation project. So a bit of a mouthful, but it's a fantastic project. And as part of this project, we're creating a new learning resource. The aim of the overall project is to give fresh perspectives on the value of Greyfriars Kirkyard to communities today. And the new learning resource will consider how learning about the past can help us understand the present and shape the future. You know, as all the other speakers have mentioned, you know, that's quite a key part of it. So before we look at the new learning resource, I'm going to give a very brief introduction just to show you how we've used graveyards and how you can use them as a local heritage learning resource. So at Archaeology Scotland, we have developed Attainment Through Archaeology, which is a skills development programme mainly aimed at young people who are struggling to engage with mainstream education. And some of the skills that are developed during these sessions include a graveyard survey, which you can see here, somebody doing a plane table survey. This was a plane table survey we did of a graveyard in Cumnock in East Ayrshire, and gravestone recording as well. And these hands-on activities offer a great mix of heritage skills, from recording and researching to conservation and interpretation. So local historic graveyards are a great focus for interdisciplinary projects too. You saw all the survey work we're doing and the interpretation work as well, which can feed into lots of different areas of the curriculum. So the interpretation you see here, these are just a few cards from a set of top trumps that we created. They were designed by participants in an intergenerational project we delivered in Leith last summer with the Citadel Youth Centre. And this was their sort of finished product. They did a little walking trail around historic Leith, and different points on the trail, different historic points on the trail, they created top trump cards for us. So they had a set of top trumps. And graveyard survey and recording was an important part of this project. It offers a unique insight into the history of a place. So in this case, this is North Leith burial ground. So they were able to find out more about the history of Leith and the communities that once lived there by looking at the burial ground. And we found that the young people involved in this project, they were fascinated by the symbols on the gravestones. Symbols represent mortality, immortality, all the usual symbols you get on gravestones, but also tell you about occupations as well. So being in Leith, we had lots of boats and ships and anchors and navigational equipment depicted on the stones themselves, so they could record those as part of their gravestone recording. And to make sure that these activities were accessible to everyone, we adapted and simplified our own Archaeology Scotland gravestone recording forms, so to make a more user-friendly version. And we used iPads to take the photos, and again, that's easier to then share and discuss the images that you have. And if anybody is interested in doing some gravestone recording, they can get in touch with us at Archaeology Scotland. We have kind of templates of recording forms that you could use. And just before we leave Leith and head up the road to Greyfriars, I just wanted to mention this. One of the young people working on the Citadel project that we did in Leith lived near Constitution Street, which is where the new tramway is being built. And he'd watched the archaeologists working on the site before construction began. And the Constitution Street is built through church land, and archaeologists uncovered a late medieval graveyard. And in total, I think there were about 750 people, bodies were excavated on that site, dating from the 1400s to the 1700s. And it resulted in an amazing project called The Past Lives of Leith. So these former residents of Leith were brought to life through the analysis of their skeletons and the creation of facial reconstructions. So we decided to have a go at this ourselves. So this was our first sort of introductory activity to kind of engage the young people. And these were our results, not quite as good as the computer generated ones in the main project, but the group created facial reconstructions. You can see them at various stages here. And it was a really great activity, just using cheap plastic, Halloween skulls and clay. And this is a Young Archaeologists Club activity actually, and we'll put a link to the activity in the chat in case anybody wants to have a go themselves. So now to Greyfriars in Edinburgh. And as I said, I've been working with Edinburgh World Heritage on this project for the last couple of years. We've delivered a number of sessions at Greyfriars Kirkyard with 6VT youth that you can see here, encouraging them to explore the kirkyard by taking part in observational activities. These are some of the resources we have here. So there was the selfie hunt, symbol spotters activities. They also shared their impressions of the kirkyard with us by completing the visitor survey. And all these resources are on our Heritage Resources portal. And again, we'll pop a link into the chat in case anybody wants to have a go at these activities with their learners, with the young people. And the 6VT group, then went on to think about mortuary traditions in Scotland and comparing these to traditions in other parts of the world. And this is where Fernanda, who's doing all the behind the scenes stuff for us today, our fantastic colleague Fernanda, she came along with the group and shared. Fernanda's from Mexico, and so she shared some Day of the Dead traditions with the group. And so they had to go at making their sugar skulls, like you can see here. We had lots of fun activities. They also made paper flowers and chiseled paper, and Fernanda made some short how-to guides, videos, which you can view on our YouTube channel. And again, we'll stick the link to those in the chat as well. And really nice activities that you can do with any groups. So we've been working on this new resource for Greyfriars, and I'm just gonna give you a really brief taster. It's a work in progress. We've got an event next Monday, which I'll tell you about, where we're asking teachers and educators to come along to Greyfriars to give us some feedback on the resource. And this new resource really takes a different look at the graveyard, and we've got versions of the resource which are aimed at second and third level learners, but they can be adapted for younger or older pupils and young people in different settings. So the resource itself is an educator's pack, and then there's a set of 5 PowerPoints which take a look at different aspects of really just one gravestone that we're looking at. So let me just see, so we've got activity cards as well. So we've got the 5 PowerPoints, we've got activity cards, activities that young people can take part in, and these are all linked to the PowerPoints, to the original sources and questions and discussion points in the PowerPoints. And so I'll share a few extracts from the PowerPoints just to give you a flavour. So the first PowerPoint introduces Greyfriars Kirkyard and looks at different types of historical sources. The focus then turns to just one particular gravestone, and that's Thomas Riddell's gravestone. So it's said that the grave of Thomas Riddell inspired J.K. Rowling when she named the character Tom Riddle Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter books. So it's a really popular destination for tourists coming to Greyfriars. So we use that one gravestone as the focus of this learning resource. And the next PowerPoint encourages learners to find out more about the real Thomas Riddell and his family. So although his name was taken and used in Harry Potter, what was the real story behind this person? And it looks in more detail about the information we can get from gravestones, and asks learners to take this information and create a family tree. So it's a more accessible way of presenting information. And then we go on to find out where Thomas Riddell and his family lived. And this is a map regression activity, really, so comparing historic maps and looking at changes that have taken place over time, and comparing historic maps to modern aerial photos, again, looking for changes in landscape and in place names. And all of these PowerPoints are interactive, so they have links to the National Library of Scotland's maps website and the side-by-side version of that, which is a fantastic resource. And then we dive into the stories of the main people in our family. So we've got Thomas Riddell. We take a closer look at his story, which is really interesting because he was a captain in the East India Company. And learners are encouraged to uncover details of Thomas Riddell's East India Company activities using the 3DEX database. So the website has information about the ships that he captained and the routes that he sailed as he was trading goods in India and Southeast Asia. And finally, we uncover the story of his wife, Elizabeth Riddell, exploring her family's links to Jamaica and the Atlantic slave trade. And again, they're encouraged to do a little bit of research themselves by using UCL's Legacies of British Slave Ownership website to sort of trace her family through that route and compare different primary sources relating to the experiences of enslaved people in the Caribbean. So really, I mean, that is just a tiny, tiny wee taster of quite an extensive resource that is just in the planning stages. We are, as I say, looking for feedback. So if any teachers or educators would like to join us at Greyfriars Kirkyard next Monday at 4 p.m, we'll have a short tour of the graveyard, followed by some refreshments, and then we'll take a closer look at the resource. And we'll add a link to this event's up on Eventbrite, so we'll add a link in the chat. So if anybody wants to join us for that, please feel free, because the more people we can have, the better. And just finally, Becca, finally, Heritage Heroes Awards are built into all of the work that we do. So all the work I've talked about, all the young people who are involved, get Heritage Hero Awards for participating in the project. So Heritage Hero Awards is our wider achievement award for any heritage projects. And again, we'll put information in the chat. And Becca knows all about the awards. Becca runs the awards for us. So any questions, ask Becca. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jane. It always amazes me how many routes that looking at one gravestone can take you down. It's a great foundation for heritage projects, and thank you very much for bringing up the Heritage Hero Award, which I think leads us very nicely into our last presentation. So last but not least, we've got a double act from East Ayrshire of Carolyn McFarlane from the Learning Outdoor Support Team and Nancy Brown from Dronghan Primary School. So Carolyn and Nancy will be providing us with a case study from the school using local heritage and using the Heritage Hero Award as well. So I'll pass over to you both now. Perfect.
That's great. So in this presentation, you're going to hear from two teachers working in East Ayrshire. That's myself, Carolyn McFarlane from the LOS team and the Curriculum Outdoor Support Team, and Nancy Brown from Dronghan Primary School. I think Nancy's put her mic on, so she might be able to say hello.
Hello.
Hello there, Nancy. So we're going to talk about how the Heritage Detective Award has been used since each year since 2018 to provide a framework for interdisciplinary heritage-themed topic called The Story of Our Village. And to give you a bit of context about how we came to do this work together, I can tell you that in East Ayrshire we have the Learning Outdoors support team. I'm a teacher working on the SAC-funded Curriculum Outdoors Attainment Challenge project, which is part of the team, and the coach programme has allowed us to work with selected schools for an entire school year to support and develop practice in taking learning outdoors. And this includes introducing wider achievement awards to support learning across the curriculum. We recommend Archaeology Scotland's Heritage Hero Awards for use in primary 4 classes upwards, as a way to engage with local heritage using resources that can be found within easy distance of the school gate. In the school year 2017 to 18, Nancy from Drongan Primary and I worked together to look at how the Heritage Hero Award could be used in Nancy's P45 class. So how do outdoor learning and the Heritage Hero Awards work together? Outdoor learning is a pedagogy, not a subject or curricular area, so it's a teaching strategy. Our team uses the resources outdoors we can access easily to stimulate and provide the context for learning. Sometimes those resources are provided by the natural environment and sometimes by the built environment. Learning Outdoors and Heritage Hero Awards complement each other in a way that engages learners in investigations into their own community heritage. Nancy had previously worked with classes on an interdisciplinary topic based on the history of the village of Drongan, and the Heritage Hero Award structure was an opportunity to revisit the theme using the Heritage Detective Framework: plan, investigate, engage, inspire, and reflect. So, Drongan isn't a large village, as you can see from the modern map on the left. The school, which you can just about make out possibly, is in pink. It takes up a significant part of the village footprint. Much of the housing we see today is from the 20th century, though there's been settlement here for many hundreds of years. And in the 20th century, the mines were the biggest local employers. The mines have closed, and now the village is essentially a residential area in a rural settlement, in a rural setting. So Nancy, would you like to say what employment is like in the village currently?
Okay. Well, today there's approximately about 2,000 people of working age in the village. And of course, as Callan said, the closure of Killer Colliery was devastating to the miners, as that had been their whole reason for coming to stay in Drongan, as the mine had been projected to last for 100 years. Drongan was going to be planned as a new town, and there were huge ambitious plans for what it would turn out to be. But unfortunately, due to problems underground, the mine closed prematurely. So with links to preparing the young workforce, children over the past years have completed a questionnaire about where their parents work now, and not many are employed in the village. There's only a handful of shops, so a few of the parents work in those. A receptionist at the Drongan pharmacy or the surgery. Most of them travel to nearby towns of Ayr, Kilmarnock or Cumnock. There's a few who even live away during the week and come home from England at the weekend to rejoin their families. So it's a much changed village because everything was centred around the mining community. The buses left 3 times a day to do the day shift, back shift and night shift on Killer, and they all knew each other. They were all working for the same end. So it has completely changed the village today.
Thanks, Nancy. So if you were to visit Drongan now, it's obviously not immediately apparent why there's so many homes, and we wanted to learn more about the village, of how village of Drongan, how it came to be and how it developed into what we see now. So how did we get started? We kept it simple. We looked at maps, and first we looked at local maps, past and present, and we were able to access the maps mentioned before from the National Library of Scotland. We were able to see the Victorian period, the 50s and the present day. And these were displayed on the class Promethean board from the start of the conversation. So the school also had some books that had been in the school for a long time, underused. Nancy, did you tell us a little bit about the books? That was an interesting project.
Well, our main source of information has been a book called Drongan, The Story of a Mining Village. and it was actually published in 1978 by a job creation team. Drongan and the surrounding area was chosen as the documented history at that time was so sparse. And this has actually been an invaluable resource to us, as it has early history of Drongan, photographs, historical document copies, and maps through the ages. And at the time of its creation, residents were interviewed to get a first-hand account of village life, what they had remembered from their childhood. We've got another book called Old Coylton, Drongan and Dalrymple by Hugh Maxwell. And again, it gives us photographs from the past, and that helps to engage the children greatly. We access the Scottish mining websites. We've looked at Stair Church website to find baptismal records, because before the church was built in Drongan, most of the residents travelled to Stair to go to church, so we could find out there, you know, that they'd come from the old village called Teaglum.
So,
okay.
Oops, sorry. Go away. So are people seeing an extra bit of the screen on top of the PowerPoint at the moment, or is that just me?
I don't think so. I can just see the slide.
Right. Okay. The books were invaluable, as Nancy says, but most of all, it was about exploring and going outside. Well, at least in the initial stages. So we went for walks, we looked at street names, the layout of the streets, and we just went for a general explore. During the walks, the pupils would sometimes share family stories about where people lived or live, and even about good places to play. And as someone who didn't know Drongan at all, this really helped me develop a sense of place. It's often the case that teaching staff know very little about the setting they are working in. We also visited buildings and monuments in the village, and we made drawings and looked for clues in signage and building styles, and we made giant outdoor timelines in the playground. Most importantly, we modelled and encouraged asking questions about what we found, and the pupils asked lots and lots of questions with very little prompting. Looking at maps in particular allowed us to begin planning and raise lots of questions. In Victorian times, there was a railway station at Smithy and a different village name. Some of the old place names were familiar from modern street names, but there were obviously lots of changes to a small community in a relatively short space of time. The maps from the past helped direct later walks to important buildings that were still standing, like the local churches, and to the location of buildings that no longer existed, like the Miners' Rows very close to the school itself. And I know Nancy did a bit of work in the playground on the Miners' Rows.
Okay, so from the information that we'd gathered from the online resource, the children wanted to find out the actual size of the houses, because they kept being mentioning that everything was overcrowded and conditions were really poor for everybody. So we actually measured out the actual outline of what these houses would be, and they actually, what were called the single end, which was just a one apartment building, they were 12 feet by 12 feet, or approximately 4 metres by 4 metres, and inside that small space there would be 9 residents. So there could be a mix of families and lodgers staying in the building, because at the time only married miners were allowed to have a house, and all the single men had to just lodge with some of the other families. So you can imagine conditions were absolutely horrendous. They had to share one open closet, dry closet, amongst about 65 people. So I think the smell had been horrendous. So as Callan mentioned, the children went to visit the important buildings, and afterwards they were tasked to find out when they were built, and a few had date stones on the actual buildings, which was very helpful. So after discussion, the children later marked out a timeline on the playground, and the jumps were in every 10 years, and then they fitted in and chalked in where all the important buildings, when they had been erected or special events had taken place.
Okay, so it was very much pupil-led learning, as we have mentioned. So there was a record of activities created in the form of a giant floor book, and the children's questions were added. For example, when was the first house built? When was Drongan's football team set up? What was on the school site before the school was built? And then we had to work out how to find the answers. So as Nancy's been speaking about some of the ways we did this, but we moved on to questionnaires to fill in some of the gaps. So Nancy, talking about the creation of the questionnaires.
Yeah, so each year the questionnaires have been slightly different according to the children's interests. For example, last year I had a lot of children who had great-grandparents who'd worked in the mines. So the questionnaire was based on the family history, what they knew about the mines, which mine they'd worked in, what the conditions were like, and things like that. We had a retired teacher who had been born and brought up in Drongan and taught in Drongan. So she came in to speak about her life as a child and as an adult. And then different questionnaires, as I said, each year have been planned. And then last year we also put out an appeal on the school blog to ask for information about Drongan in the past, what the older residents knew, because as you realise, we're getting fewer and fewer people who are still around to tell us these things. So that's why it's so important to get it recorded. But last year we had a huge number of mining artefacts sent into the school, or the children brought them in and took them away again. And it was great to see these things because it just brought everything to life. There was safety lamps, the helmets, even miners' boots. And we even had the last harness for the last Ayrshire pit pony. We had it in display in the classroom. So we just try to use the community as much as possible to get first-hand and family involvement, so that the children, it makes it real for them. And then we also went on a visit to Rowntree Court, which is a sheltered accommodation in Drongan, and the children had prepared a questionnaire for the older residents, and it was much more personal. They wanted to know what they played at when they were young, where they went to school, what they did at school, what shops were around, and of course the residents, some of them had actually stayed in the miners' rows, so they were actually able to tell them firsthand how dreadful the conditions had been. But they'd also said that it had been a very happy childhood and that all the neighbours had helped each other. And wash day, of course, was an event in itself. So the children learned lots from the older people. And I think the older people enjoyed reminiscing about their experiences as well.
So pupils have been able to draw on family and community knowledge, and they've engaged in learning all the way across the curriculum. One of the things we did was to encourage close observation of buildings and monuments by asking pupils to create detailed line drawings. So there was an element of expressive arts here. The ability to formulate good questions can often be a difficult skill to teach, but children were engaged and keen to find answers, so they persevered at their question making. And the interviews with family and community encouraged listening and talking and general skills and literacy. Using maps naturally led to learning about map symbols and scales. And this was a genuinely interdisciplinary project with learning and teaching extended well beyond social studies. In order to fulfill the Heritage Hero Inspire element, pupils made a film and shared this with the community, and it shows the variety of sources used and gives the pupils gave the pupils a chance to share family stories, and in some cases the story of the houses they lived in. The YouTube format was especially useful when parents and the community couldn't be invited into the school, and this is the YouTube link to one of the presentations. In summary, we've engaged in learning across the curriculum, particularly social studies, literacy, numeracy, RME, expressive arts and health and well-being. Most importantly, the project has been about community engagement and developing a pride in the village and the respect for the achievements of our families and those who have gone before us. Nancy, would you like to say how the school has come to see the value of the project and what's going to happen in future?
Yeah, okay. So, well, when I started out this project way back with Carolyn in 2017-18, I was very apprehensive about doing it because, as Carolyn said, I didn't know much about the village. All I knew that it had been a former mining village and that all the people did was really stay and work elsewhere. However, with Carolyn's leadership and guidance, I began to realise what a rich heritage the village had. My head teacher, Sean Maddox, is very keen to have the children take a pride in their village, and he sees the role of the lost team significant, as he believes that the children should be aware of their heritage, and if they are, then they were less likely to vandalise the village. So we've planted trees as well with the John Muir Award, and we try to work very much in hand with the local businesses, and so that the children can see the links and the importance of the shops in the village as well. We also have a very strong active community council who support the school greatly. And also what's really interesting is we have a woodland that was created after the open cast mine was closed at Hanneston. And last year, the regeneration group actually took ownership of it, and it's now called Community Tree, and they actually are developing things to make it more interesting for the kids. The families have been involved in making fairy houses. They've got a fairy garden, and they're lovely wooden structures. There's been a huge amount of time spent, and my own two grandchildren who live in Dundee went to visit the fairy garden last summer and then insisted that Grandpa made a big fairy tower to be installed, and with a great installation ceremony. So the children also go visit there in the school because they've now installed bat boxes and owl boxes. And I think the Hanneston, the actual community, could be a thing for the future that could be studied along with the built environment. I think that's something that could be used greatly in the future.
Right. So it's mostly been about building pride in and respect for our community, as Nancy says. So the Heritage Detective Award was a springboard for an awful lot of other work going on in the community and around the school. So it's been a great success, and it's gone in many different directions, and some of them completely unexpected. If you want to find out more, we've got case studies on our blog pages. Drongan Primary School case study is one of 3 that we've got on the Heritage Hero Awards there, and there's links so you can find out more. And as outdoor learning is one of the 3 pillars of learning for sustainability in Scottish education, we're constantly reflecting on how our work contributes to learning for sustainability, obviously. We're increasingly using and referring to the global goals as a tool for planning and reflection. Obviously, goal 4, quality education, is at the forefront of our work, and the Heritage Hero Awards ensure shared experiences for all learners and link directly back to the curriculum. And what has been particularly powerful in the Drongan case is the role the awards have played in ensuring the development and preservation of pride and respect for the community, the development of a strong sense of place. We use the awards work towards Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and we're helping, this is a bit of teacher talk here, to create those responsible citizens and effective contributors who will look after our village in years to come. So that's our presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carolyn and Nancy. It's a fantastic example of how the Heritage Hero Award can be used in a local heritage context, and great to see all those different generations getting involved in the project as well, with families and the whole community getting involved there, and how it's linked to different areas of the curriculum as well. It's amazing what you get when young people are involved in planning their own projects as well. It's great to see the different avenues they take it down that we wouldn't necessarily think of ourselves. The Heritage Hero Awards, the age range we've used them with are from 4 to, I think, oldest person's been in their 90s. So they really are, there's something there for everyone. They're really flexible, really adaptable, and they're designed with sort of inclusivity at the heart of them. So they are for everyone. As Carolyn said, it's not about the sort of primary secondary divide. They're there to adapt and to your project. So if you have project ideas and you want to discuss them with us, we're happy to meet with you to discuss how the awards can fit with your project. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our presenters, to Betsy, to Liz, to Kate, Jane, Carolyn and Nancy. Thanks so much to my fellow organisation team, Jane and Fernanda, who's been working behind the scenes as well. Yeah, thank you very much for giving up your time. I know I've really enjoyed the talks and I hope you have too. And yeah, good night. Thank you.